Before breakfast became a box on a shelf, a drive-through window, or a sweet drink poured into a plastic cup, morning food was something slower. It came from the ground, from the sea, from clay ovens, stone mills, woven baskets, and the hands of people who woke before sunrise because the day demanded strength. Today, many people begin their mornings tired, before the day has even started. They reach for caffeine, sugar, refined bread, or something wrapped in plastic and designed to be eaten quickly. And yet, for thousands of years, ancient people were asking the same quiet question in a different way. What gives the body steady strength? Not excitement, not a rush, not a temporary spark. Strength. The Bible was never written as a nutrition textbook. It does not speak in calories, macros, blood sugar curves, or gut microbiome charts. But inside its stories, journeys, feasts, famines, harvests, and wilderness meals, there are foods that appear again and again. Simple foods. Morning foods. Foods eaten by shepherds, farmers, fishermen, travelers, widows, kings, prophets, and families gathered near the first light of day. And what is fascinating is not that the ancient world knew everything. It did not. What is fascinating is that modern science is now looking closely at many of the same foods and noticing something the old world may have understood through observation. Food is not only about what you eat. It is about how it is grown, how it is prepared when it is eaten, and what kind of life surrounds it. This video is for educational and documentary purposes only. It is not medical advice, and no single food can replace professional care, medication, or a balanced lifestyle. If you have a medical condition, allergies, or dietary restrictions, always speak with a qualified health professional. Today, we are going through 12 ancient morning foods from the biblical world that modern science is quietly reconsidering. Stay with me, because number 7 may change the way you think about one of the oldest breakfast foods in human history. And by the time we reach number 1, the strange passage from the prophet Ezekiel may begin to look less like an ancient mystery and more like a forgotten food pattern. Let's begin. Number 12. Barley porridge. In the ancient world, morning did not begin with abundance. For most people, it began with work. A farmer stepped into the field while the air was still cool. A mother stirred embers back to life. A child carried water from a well. Somewhere near the edge of a village, grain was being crushed between stones before the sun fully rose. And among the grains of the biblical world, barley was one of the most humble. Wheat was often preferred when people could afford it. But barley was strong. It grew in poorer soil. It ripened earlier. It belonged to workers, travelers, and people who needed food that was practical before it was beautiful. In the book of Ruth, barley harvest is not just background scenery. It is the setting of survival. Ruth enters the fields to glean behind the harvesters, picking up what remains so she and Naomi can eat. There is no luxury in the scene, but there is dignity. There is a field, a morning, a widow, and grain gathered one handful at a time. A bowl of barley in the ancient morning might have been plain. Cracked barley simmered slowly in water, maybe finished with a little salt, maybe softened with milk if the household had animals, maybe eaten beside dried fruit if the season had been kind. Modern nutrition gives us a new language for what such a bowl offered. Barley contains a type of soluble fiber called beta-glucan. When cooked slowly, that fiber gives barley its soft, slightly thick texture. In the body, soluble fiber can help slow digestion, support fullness, and contribute to steadier energy after a meal. But the ancient person did not need to say beta-glucan. They only had to notice that a bowl of barley stayed with them longer than a sweet fruit alone, that it warmed the body, that it could carry a person through hours of field labor without demanding more. And the preparation mattered. Barley was not meant to be swallowed in a rush. It was soaked, cracked, boiled, stirred, and softened. The old way turned a hard seed into something the body could receive. A modern version might be simple. Whole barley or barley flakes, cooked slowly until tender, served warm, with a few dates or raisins for sweetness, and perhaps a spoonful of plain yogurt if tolerated. Nothing dramatic. Nothing expensive. Nothing promising miracles. Just a grain that knew how to endure. And maybe that is why barley feels so ancient. It does not shout. It sustains. But the next food carried a different kind of morning power. Sweetness, minerals, and desert survival packed into one small fruit. Number 11. Dates. Imagine a traveler leaving before sunrise. The road is dry, the air is still gentle, but by noon the heat will become heavy. There may be no market for miles, no kitchen, no fire, no time to sit and cook. So the traveler carries what the desert has always respected: dates. Dates were not just fruit in the ancient Near East. They were portable energy. They were trade goods, hospitality, sweetness, and survival pressed into a small brown shape that could last for weeks. Palm trees appear across the biblical imagination as symbols of uprightness, beauty, and flourishing. Their fruit belonged to the world of oases, gardens, caravans, and long journeys between dry places. To the modern eye, a date may look like candy, and it is sweet. But unlike refined sugar, a whole date arrives with fiber, potassium, small amounts of minerals, and plant compounds that come wrapped in the architecture of a real fruit. That does not make dates magical. It does not mean unlimited amounts are wise for everyone, especially people who need to monitor blood sugar. But it does mean the ancient world understood something practical. When energy had to travel, dates traveled well. A small morning meal of dates with nuts, grain, or cultured milk would not have been random. The sweetness of the date could be balanced by fat, protein, fiber, and sourness from other foods. That combination matters because the body responds differently to a whole meal than to sweetness alone. Picture it. A clay bowl. 3 dates split open by hand. A few crushed almonds. A spoon of thick curds. A quiet breakfast before walking into a long day. There is also a lesson in the texture. Dates ask you to chew. They are dense, sticky, slow. They are not designed to disappear in 3 seconds the way modern sweet foods often are. The old world had sweetness. It simply had sweetness with boundaries. And that may be the deeper wisdom of dates. They remind us that sweet things were once seasonal, whole, and earned by the landscape, not engineered to be endless. The next food is almost the opposite of dates. Not dense, not rich, not sweet in the same way, but cool, watery, and remembered with surprising emotion by people wandering in the desert. Number 10. Cucumbers and melons. There is a strange moment in the wilderness story. The Israelites, tired and restless, remember the foods of Egypt. They speak of fish, cucumbers, melons, leeks, onions, and garlic. It is a complaint, yes, but it is also a food memory. And food memory is powerful. They are not only remembering flavor, they are remembering moisture, coolness, gardens, irrigated fields, the sensation of biting into something crisp when the body is hot and thirsty. Cucumbers and melons were morning foods of heat. In a world without refrigeration, without electrolyte drinks, without climate control, water-rich plants mattered. They were not dramatic medicine. They were daily relief. Imagine a worker in Egypt before the full heat of the day. A piece of flatbread, a slice of cucumber, a wedge of melon, a little salt, perhaps herbs. Nothing complicated, but perfectly matched to the climate. Modern science does not need to exaggerate this. Cucumbers and melons are mostly water. They provide hydration, volume, and freshness. They are not nutrient-dense in the way legumes or fish are, but that is not their purpose. Their purpose is gentleness. In traditional food cultures, watery vegetables often appear beside saltier, denser foods. This balance helps a meal feel lighter. It brings freshness to grains and proteins. It makes the morning table less heavy. The ancient complaint in the wilderness is often read as spiritual weakness, and that may be the main point of the story. But inside the complaint is a detail that feels very human. People remembered foods that made the body feel alive in heat. The lesson is not that cucumbers are a miracle food. They are not. The lesson is that the body remembers refreshment. And sometimes a wise morning meal is not about adding more stimulation. Sometimes it is about restoring what the night, the heat, or the previous day has taken away. Cool food. Living water inside a plant. A taste of gardens in a dry place. But there was another food in that same memory of Egypt, one that came not from fields, but from water itself. And it brings us to the fishermen of Galilee. Number 9. Small fish. Before sunrise on the Sea of Galilee, the water would have been dark and silver. Boats moved quietly. Nets were lowered by hands that knew the weight of wet rope. Men worked through the night because fish do not wait for convenience. By morning, a fire might be burning near the shore. Bread warming. Fish roasting. Smoke rising into the first light. Fish appears throughout the biblical world not as luxury, but as livelihood. Fishermen are called from their nets. Crowds are fed with loaves and fish. After the resurrection, Jesus is described sharing fish by the shore. It is one of the most grounded images in Scripture. Fire, bread, fish, morning. Modern nutrition science has a clear reason for paying attention to fish, especially small, oily fish. Fish can provide high-quality protein, vitamin D in some species, minerals, and long-chain omega-3 fats, known as EPA and DHA. But again, the ancient world did not know those names. They knew that fish was nourishing, that it could be dried, salted, cooked quickly, or shared, that it belonged to communities living near lakes, rivers, and coasts. A morning meal of fish would have been deeply practical. Protein after a night of labor. Salt after sweat. Fat, in a form the body could use. Bread to carry it. Herbs to brighten it. For a modern viewer, this does not mean everyone should eat fish every morning. Dietary needs, access, allergies, mercury concerns, and personal choices all matter. But the pattern is worth noticing. The biblical breakfast by the shore was not sweet cereal. It was not a stimulant. It was a real meal. Protein, fire, grain, and time. There is something almost medicinal in the scene, even before we speak of nutrients. A group of tired men. A quiet shore. Food prepared over coals. The day beginning not with noise but with restoration. And perhaps that is why this image has lasted. Because some meals do more than feed the body. They return people to themselves. The next food is smaller than fish, easier to carry, and so valuable that ancient travelers could pack it as concentrated strength. Number 8. Almonds. In Genesis, when Jacob sends his sons back to Egypt, he tells them to carry some of the best products of the land: balm, honey, spices, myrrh, pistachios, and almonds. Almonds were not treated as filler, they were gifts. In the biblical imagination, the almond tree also carries symbolic weight, because it is one of the first trees to wake after winter. Its blossoms appear early, pale and delicate, as if the tree is watching for the new season before the rest of the land has opened its eyes. That image matters for a morning food. Almonds are the food of early waking. In the ancient world, a handful of almonds could travel. It did not require a cooking pot. It did not spoil quickly. It could be eaten with dried fruit, bread, or curds. For merchants, shepherds, and families moving through uncertain land, nuts were dense, useful, and respected. Modern nutrition describes almonds in terms of unsaturated fats, fiber, plant protein, magnesium, and vitamin E. These nutrients may support satiety and can fit into heart-conscious dietary patterns when eaten in sensible amounts. But the preparation detail is simple and often overlooked. Ancient nuts were not coated in sugar powder, fried oils, artificial flavors, or candy shells. They were eaten plain, sometimes soaked, sometimes lightly roasted, sometimes crushed into paste. The almond itself was enough. A small morning bowl might hold a few almonds, 2 dates, and a piece of coarse bread. By modern standards, it looks almost too simple. But simplicity is not emptiness. It is focus. The body does not always need novelty. Sometimes it needs food it can understand. There is also a quiet lesson in chewing nuts. You cannot drink them quickly. You cannot inhale them like a soft pastry. They force the meal to slow down. And slowness changes breakfast. It gives the body time to receive the message that food has arrived. The ancient world did not speak of mindful eating as a trend. But many of its foods required attention by their very nature. A hard shell, a bitter skin, a small kernel, a slow chew. And the next food takes us into one of the oldest and most intimate forms of nourishment in the biblical world: milk that had begun to chew. Number 7. Curds and cultured milk. This is the one worth pausing over. When modern people hear milk and honey, they often imagine sweetness, abundance, maybe even comfort. But in the ancient Near East, milk did not behave the way it does in a modern refrigerator. Fresh milk was fragile. In a hot climate, it changed quickly. It thickened. It soured. it separated. And instead of seeing that change only as spoilage, ancient people learned to guide it. Curds, yogurt-like foods, strained milk, and fermented dairy became part of daily survival. In Genesis, Abraham offers curds and milk to his visitors under the trees of Mamre. In Judges, Jael gives milk to Sisera. In Proverbs and other ancient poetry, milk appears as nourishment, hospitality, and abundance. But the interesting part is not only that they drank milk. It is that much of the milk in that world was likely cultured, soured, or transformed, because that was how milk lasted. Modern science now uses the word probiotics for live microorganisms that may support health when consumed in appropriate forms. Fermented foods, including yogurt and cultured dairy, are studied for their relationship with digestion and the gut microbiome. But we need to be careful here. Fermented dairy is not right for everyone. Some people are lactose intolerant. Some have dairy allergies. Pregnant people, young children, older adults, or those with weakened immune systems need extra caution with unpasteurized or traditionally fermented foods. So this is not a command, it is a historical observation. The ancient world discovered that milk could become more digestible for some people, more stable, and more complex in flavor when guided by time and microbes. Imagine a morning tent scene. The sun just beginning to warm the edge of the hills. A skin of milk hanging in the shade. A bowl of thick curds. A piece of barley bread. A few dates. A traveler being welcomed before the road continues. That is not a supplement protocol. That is hospitality. And maybe this is why cultured milk remains so meaningful. It teaches that nourishment sometimes comes through transformation. Milk becomes curds. Grain becomes bread. Grapes become raisins. A hard morning becomes bearable when food has been prepared before the need arrives. And that leads us to the fruit of the vine. Not wine this time, but the quiet morning sweetness of grapes and raisins. Number 6. Grapes and raisins. The grapevine is one of the great images of the biblical world. Vineyards appear as inheritance, labor, blessing, judgment, patience, and joy. A vineyard requires time. It cannot be rushed. You plant, prune, wait, watch, harvest, press, dry, and store. Fresh grapes were seasonal. Raisins were memory preserved. When grapes were dried in the sun, they became portable sweetness for travelers, workers, and soldiers. Raisin cakes appear in the biblical record as food associated with energy, celebration, and provision. There is a beautiful practicality here. A fresh grape is fragile. A raisin endures. Ancient people understood the art of making summer last into another season. Modern nutrition looks at grapes and raisins differently depending on amount and context. Grapes bring water, natural sugars, and polyphenols. Raisins concentrate sweetness and calories, which can be useful in small portions but easy to overdo in a modern setting where food is everywhere and physical labor is often low. The ancient setting matters. A handful of raisins for a shepherd walking hills all day is not the same as endless sweet snacks eaten at a desk. Context changes food. That may be one of the deepest lessons in ancient eating. The same food can be wise or unwise, depending on the life surrounding it. In a morning meal, raisins could soften grain, sweeten barley porridge, or sit beside nuts and curds. They added energy without needing a refined sugar industry. They were not unlimited. They were portioned by season, labor, and scarcity. Imagine raisins scattered into warm grain as the first light enters a stone house. No label, no marketing, no claim of superfood power, just preserved fruit meeting a simple grain. And perhaps that is enough. Because the ancient table was not trying to hack the body, it was trying to carry the body through the day. The next food is less sweet, more earthy, and deeply connected to survival in times when kings themselves were running for their lives. Number 5. Beans of the field. In 2 Samuel, when David and his people are exhausted in the wilderness, they are brought food. Wheat, barley, flour, roasted grain, beans, lentils, honey, curds, sheep, and cheese. It is one of the most practical food lists in Scripture. No decoration, no luxury, just food for people who are hungry, weary, and thirsty. Among those foods are beans. The exact varieties of ancient beans can be debated, but the broader pattern is clear. Legumes were survival food. They restored strength slowly. They grew from the soil. They could be dried, stored, carried, cooked into stews, and shared among many mouths. A bean stew in the morning may sound unusual to modern Americans, but in much of human history, breakfast was not dessert. It was whatever could give strength for labor. Beans bring plant protein, fiber, minerals, and complex carbohydrates. Modern nutrition often connects legumes with dietary patterns associated with long-term health, especially when they replace more heavily processed foods. But the ancient wisdom was not just in eating beans, it was in preparing them, soaking, rinsing, cooking slowly, adding herbs, eating them with grain. These practices were not aesthetic. They made legumes more practical, more digestible, and more useful. Across cultures, soaking and slow cooking became common because people observed the difference. Picture a clay pot left near the coals before dawn. Beans that had soaked overnight now soften into a thick stew. A little cumin, a little salt, a handful of greens if the season allows, bread torn by hand. This is not glamorous food, but exhausted people do not need glamour. They need restoration. And that is what makes the wilderness list so powerful. It tells us what people brought when survival mattered. Grains, legumes, fermented dairy, fruit, and meat for strength. Not novelty, not stimulation. Foundation. The old world understood that a strong morning was often built the night before. By soaking. By storing. By waiting. And the next chapter is about foods so small they were used almost as currency, flavor, medicine, and moral metaphor. Number 4. Mint, dill, and cumin. There is a moment in the New Testament where Jesus mentions mint, dill, and cumin. The point of the passage is not nutrition. It is about misplaced priorities. People carefully tithing tiny herbs while neglecting justice, mercy, and faithfulness. But the detail is revealing. These herbs and seeds were valuable enough to count, small enough to overlook, important enough to name. Mint, dill, and cumin belong to the flavor world of the ancient table. They could brighten heavy foods, help preserve, scent the breath, and make simple meals feel complete. A bowl of beans changes when cumin is added. Curds change when dill is stirred in. Warm water changes when mint is crushed between the fingers. Modern science studies culinary herbs for their plant compounds, essential oils, and potential digestive effects. But we should keep the claim gentle. Herbs are not magic. They do not replace medical care. Their power is often quieter. They make real food desirable. That may sound small, but it is not. One reason modern processed food wins so easily is that it is engineered for intensity. Salt, sugar, fat, artificial flavor, crunch, speed. Ancient food cultures had a different strategy. They used herbs, a little bitterness, a little fragrance, a seed toasted on a stone, a leaf torn by hand. Flavor did not have to come from a laboratory. It came from the edge of the garden. Imagine a morning meal of thick yogurt with dill, barley bread with crushed cumin, a cup of mint steeped in hot water while the house is still quiet. There is something deeply human in this. The meal becomes more than fuel. It becomes place. You taste the soil, the season, the hands that grew it, the memory of gardens. And maybe that is why these tiny foods matter. They remind us that ancient eating was not bland survival. It was survival made fragrant. But one of the sharpest flavors of the ancient morning did not come from an herb. It came from sourness. And sourness, used wisely, may be one of the oldest tools in the human kitchen. Number 3. Vinegar and sour bread dip. In the book of Ruth, Boaz invites Ruth to eat with the workers. He tells her to come, eat bread, and dip her morsel in vinegar. It is a quiet scene. No miracle, no palace, no feast. Just a foreign woman, a field, a meal break, bread, roasted grain, and vinegar. But inside that small detail is an entire food culture. Vinegar was not merely sharp flavor. It was preservation. It was acidity. It was refreshment and heat. It could make dry bread easier to eat, brighten grain, and balance a simple field meal. In the ancient Mediterranean, vinegar and sour wine were common among workers and soldiers. They were portable, inexpensive, and useful. Mixed with water, they could be more pleasant than plain water that had been stored too long. Used with food, they made the meal feel alive. Modern science studies vinegar mostly because of acetic acid, the compound responsible for its sour taste. Some research suggests vinegar with meals may influence the way the body responds to carbohydrates, though it is not a treatment for disease and is not suitable for everyone, especially people with reflux, stomach irritation, or certain medical conditions. But historically, the larger point is simpler. Sourness slowed the meal. You do not gulp vinegar-soaked bread. You taste it. You notice it. And sourness wakes the mouth. Imagine Ruth in the field. She has been gleaning behind others, gathering what she can. Then she is invited closer. Bread is passed. Vinegar is offered. Roasted grain is placed before her. The meal is simple, but the gesture is profound. Food becomes belonging. That is something modern nutrition language often misses. A meal is not only chemistry, it is context. Stress, loneliness, hurry, gratitude, safety. These things shape the body too. The vinegar in Ruth's story is not important because it is a health hack. It is important because it sits at the intersection of survival, flavor, and kindness. A poor woman receives a place at the table. And in that moment, sour bread tastes like mercy. The next food in Ruth's meal is even older, even simpler, and maybe one of humanity's first portable breakfasts. Number 2. Parched grain. Parched grain is easy to miss. It sounds too plain to be interesting, but in the ancient world, roasted grain was one of the great practical foods. Grain could be harvested, dried, roasted, carried, and eaten without needing a full kitchen. It was field food, travel food, worker food. In Ruth's story, Boaz gives her roasted grain, and she eats until she is satisfied, with some left over. That phrase matters. Satisfied, with some left over. Parched grain was not empty. It was simple, but substantial. The roasting brought out flavor. It reduced moisture. It made the grain easier to store and easier to chew. It turned the harvest into something immediate. Before breakfast bars, before cereal boxes, before packaged snacks, there was grain roasted by fire. Modern science would describe whole grain as a source of complex carbohydrates, fiber, minerals, and plant compounds. But the ancient world knew it by experience. A handful of roasted grain could keep a worker going. It could be eaten with dates, with curds, with vinegar, with herbs, with nothing at all. There is also something symbolically beautiful here. Parched grain sits between seed and bread. It has not yet become flour. It has not been kneaded. It has not risen. It has not entered the oven. It is grain in its directness. The body receives it close to the field. Imagine workers sitting at the edge of a harvest, their hands dusty, their backs tired, the sun high now. Someone passes a pouch of roasted grain. Another person pours water. A few pieces of bread are dipped in vinegar. It is not a feast, and yet it carries the feeling of one because hunger changes the meaning of food. Modern life has made snacking almost mindless. But ancient portable foods were tied to movement, labor, and need. They were not entertainment. They had a job. And that is the lesson of parched grain. Food does not need to be complex to be wise. Sometimes it only needs to be whole enough, prepared enough, and eaten at the right moment. But now we arrive at number 1, a food from one of the strangest instructions in the prophetic writings. A mixture of grains and legumes that many modern people know by name, but few understand in its ancient context. Number 1. Ezekiel's mixed grain bread. Ezekiel chapter 4 verse 9 gives an unusual instruction. Take wheat, barley, beans, lentils, millet, and spelt. Put them into one vessel. Make bread. The larger passage is symbolic and severe. It belongs to a prophetic sign act, not a cozy cookbook. The context is hardship, siege, scarcity, and warning. But the food detail is striking. A mixed bread. Not one grain, many. Wheat for structure, barley for endurance, beans and lentils for protein and fiber, millet and spelt for diversity. Ancient bread was rarely the soft, white, uniform loaf many people know today. It was rougher, denser, darker, sometimes gritty, often sour, often made from grains that had been stone ground, soaked, fermented, or mixed with whatever the household had. Modern nutrition is increasingly interested in diversity, Diverse plants, diverse fibers, diverse grains, diverse legumes. Not because diversity sounds poetic, but because different plant foods feed the body in different ways. Whole grains and legumes bring fiber, minerals, slow-digesting carbohydrates, and plant protein. When grains and legumes appear together in traditional diets, they can complement each other nutritionally. The old world may not have known amino acid profiles, but it knew that bread made from more than one thing could carry people further when food was scarce. This is where number one becomes more than a food. It becomes a pattern. The modern food industry often moves in the opposite direction. It refines, it separates. It removes the bran, strips the germ, isolates the starch, whitens the flour, softens the texture, speeds the digestion, and then adds back vitamins on a label. Ancient mixed bread was not like that. It was not trying to be invisible in the body. It had weight, it had resistance, it asked to be chewed. And chewing is part of digestion. Imagine an ancient loaf cooling on a stone. It is not perfectly shaped. The surface is cracked. The smell is earthy and sour. Inside are grains and legumes that once belonged to different fields, now held together by water, salt, fermentation, and heat. A slice of that bread in the morning would not behave like a modern sweet pastry. It would stay. It would ground the meal. It would remind the eater that food begins as seed, not product. There is a reason this food deserves the final place. Because it gathers the entire lesson of the ancient morning table. Barley taught endurance. Dates taught measured sweetness. Cucumbers taught refreshment. Fish taught restoration. Almonds taught density. Curds taught transformation. Raisins taught preservation. Beans taught survival. Herbs taught fragrance. Vinegar taught sour balance. Parched grain taught simplicity. And Ezekiel's mixed bread teaches pattern. The wisdom was not in a single miracle ingredient, it was in the combination: whole plants, slow preparation, seasonal limits, fire, water, time, community. The ancients did not have modern nutrition science. They did not know the language of microbiomes, fatty acids, soluble fiber, or glucose response. But they watched what sustained a shepherd, what strengthened a worker, what traveled across desert, what comforted the hungry, what could be stored through winter, what belonged on the table before sunrise. And maybe that is what we are being invited to remember. Not to romanticize the past, not to pretend ancient life was easy, not to replace medicine with food stories, but to ask a quieter question. What did people know before food became so fast that the body could barely recognize it? A small change is enough to begin. A bowl of warm barley instead of a rushed sweet breakfast. A few dates with nuts instead of candy. Plain yogurt with herbs if your body tolerates it. Beans soaked overnight. Bread with texture. A meal eaten slowly enough to taste. The ancient morning table was never perfect, but it was close to the ground. And perhaps, after all our modern complexity, that closeness is part of what many people are hungry for. If this kind of quiet journey through ancient food, scripture, and modern science speaks to you, you may want to subscribe for more slow, thoughtful documentaries like this. And the next time morning feels rushed, remember the old table. A clay bowl, a piece of bread, a handful of grain, a little sourness, a little sweetness, and enough time for the body to understand that the day has begun.